Hello everyone, Bysokar here. Just wanting to create a quick guide on how to create your own NPC to go into the game. Takes a bit of time. There is over 250 config options per NPC, but lucky you don't need to set them all to make something pretty unique. Now this guide does assume that you've seen the basic how-to on contributing and change to GitHub, and that you're comfortable creating your own fork. So what I'll get you to do is go to your fork now and then browse to the plugins directory and then down to good old SRPG. Now SRPG was a custom plugin that's built to sit alongside the custom NPCs mod, and it will allow us to edit from GitHub every NPC in-game, even create new ones. So once you're in the SRPG config file folder, click on NPCs, and what you'll need to do is base your NPC off an existing one. Now a great example is the Stargate Command Soldier. So just browse through to the Stargate Command Soldier.yml file. This is the NPC basically. Every single one that you see in game comes from that text file. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of these config options. It'll allow you to get a bit of an understanding of how to build the NPC, and well, yeah, once you get the hang of that, it's basically a case of committing back a copy of this with your changes. Alright, so the first config option is the name of the NPC. It doesn't need to be unique, but the title and name combination does. For generic NPCs that are cloned all over the place, we try to not name them John Shepard or something, so I've just called it SGC Soldier. If you are planning on having a unique NPC like John Shepard, name it away. Now the title, that guy there, should be pretty straightforward. If it's Elizabeth Weir, for example, it'd be leader of the Atlantis expedition. Soldier is just a generic title that the SGC Soldier gets, sorry. Template is based off the custom NPCs templating system. We don't use it, so just leave that guy as none for now. Now, texture URI. It's slightly complicated, but not. You need to set texture type to either resource, all caps, or web, all caps. Basically, put the resource config option allows the texture URI to be pulled from the jar file in the player's client, and that can be anything you see when you use the NPC wand in single player. If you set it to web, that's just a web address. Now the official server doesn't accept any commit that has a third-party link, so if you're planning on having something link over to, I don't know, a Pokemon website or a Stargate website somewhere, that's fine, but we need to pop it on our website first. Cape texture and overlay texture operate the same way the resource textures do. You need to browse for it in the NPC wand in single player, grab the string that it pops out there, and then paste it in instead of the none value. Faction. Now faction is pretty straightforward. We've got most of them listed here. If you're unsure, just let us know. Now this does need to correlate to a faction in game, so it's best to copy and paste the value you want here. If you want a new faction created, just let us know. Alright, so the next stage, rotation behavior and rotation. Rotation behavior has a few options. You can make it so the NPC is always facing you if you select the stalking option and replace it there. Rotate body means the guy's gonna just turn around all the time. It's kind of lame, kind of not. It has its uses. No rotation is fantastic for guards that are posted somewhere. And head rotation is if you want them to act like a British Queen's Guard and have them looking at you while they're not moving. Kind of amusing. Alright, so rotation. 0 is north, 360 is also north, 180 is south, 270 is west, and 90 is east. If I'm wrong, please correct me. For job and role. Job, the only valid one at the moment is healer. It's really not something that is used. That's okay if you want to give it a go, why not? Role, we only have one valid one at the moment, which is Trader, but I'm going to cover that in another guide. The next config option we have here is Visible. Now Visible, pretty straightforward. Is the guy invisible? Is he visible? Or is he halfway in between? Halfway in between is great for hologram NPCs, so give that a go. Okay, so display. Model type is the, how do I put this pretty simply? There is a class for every entity in the game, from the Ender Dragon to a zombie to whatever. If you want to have a dragon NPC, let one of the staff members know and we'll guide you through how to grab the correct value to put in here. Otherwise just leave it as none and it'll be a humanoid. Has breasts is a code for is this one female. If you don't give it a female skin and you make this one true, it's quite amusing, so take that literally. Would you like the NPC to appear female? Now size is the next option we've got in the display section. 5 is a standard player, 4 is about an Asgard, 3 would be a child. If you want to go maybe a 6 or a 7 would probably suit a Wraith. They are a little bit taller than humans. Mix and match it a little bit. You can have a dwarf or a, short guy. Alright. Line 45 of quite a few. Our next step is to go through the behavior section. So, item number 47, we've got avoids water. Now, avoids water is exactly how it sounds. It doesn't affect the NPC's ability to swim, but it will say, alright, I'm going to go run around the lake to chase a player and kill him instead of swim through it. So it's up to you whether you want to set that or not. Behavior, the backtrack while following path. Now, if you have the movement below set to follow path, backtrack while following path being set to true will basically make it so the NPC will occasionally stop, look around. It's good if you've got an NPC going through a bushwalk perhaps, maybe they stop, they find something interesting, go for it. Turn that on or off, doesn't really matter, it's up to you. Door interaction is as it sounds. You have 3 options here. Break is pull a zombie and knock down the door. That'll only work on a wooden door, it doesn't work on iron or stronger. We've got open. Open does work on stronger doors. It doesn't work on coded doors or any of those kind of security options. And none, finally, is they cannot open the door. So, yeah, pretty straightforward. The next option we have here is Burns in Sun. This is helpful for night-based NPCs like zombies or vampires, for example, would be the most commonly selected for this. The next config option, can drown, is effectively, is this NPC aquatic? So if it's a fish NPC, or an NPC that should be underwater, like mermaid, whatever, not saying we have those in Stargate MC, but it is there, we set can drown to false. If it's a standard human or a wraith or god knows what, you could set it to true. Alright, next step. Fire indirectly. Now, fire indirectly is basically, does the NPC need to have time to lift their weapon up and shoot you? So you can set that to, if the NPC is far away, fire whenever. Doesn't really look too great if you use it. Surprise is good to use because it's like quick draw basically in a Western movie. They don't quite get it at, the animation doesn't quite get the gun up, but it will allow them to respond quickly. None is obviously they do need to point the gun at you. Can leap is, will this NPC jump toward its enemy if it sees it? So it'll run up to it, get to a certain distance, and then jump at you. It's good for a spider or maybe a fox or something like that. Next up, can sprint. Can sprint is, will this NPC occasionally dart around? It can look pretty ridiculous at times, but it is helpful. Can swim, straightforward, set that guy to true if you want the NPC not to drown. Yeah. Next step, boss bar. So you've got three options: never, always, and when attacking. The big purple bar that you see when you have the Ender Dragon in vanilla, that's what you'll get if you attack one of these guys and it has boss bar set to true. Set to always or when attacking. Living animation. Long story short, if you've got a NPC that has an interactable interface, maybe a book or something on a shelf, you probably want to set this to false, but if it is a humanoid walking around, set it to true, otherwise the NPC is going to look like a robot on wheels. Ignore cobwebs, straightforward. The slowdown that players get when they run through cobwebs, true or false, does this NPC get that too? Interacts with other NPCs. This guy here basically is, will the NPCs come up with some phony dialogue whenever they run into each other? It'll show for players as ... leaving that up to their imagination as to what the conversation's about. It looks pretty good, so I'd leave it on if you can. Stop on interact. So if this NPC is wandering around or following a path and you don't want it to wait, so if a player right clicks and says I want to say hello, if you don't want it to wait, set it to false, otherwise leave it to true. Even a guard NPC should say something when a player clicks on it. So stop for a second, say hi, say bugger off, I'm busy, whatever you like, and then move on. Line 77, max health. If you don't know what that is, I don't know if I can help you. 20 hearts is a standard player without armor on. 150 is a decent amount for a soldier. We're going to have NPCs with up to 10 to 20,000 health to match up against someone with quantum armor. Make up the value you like. Up to you. The next step is pause while following path. So backtrack while following path back up here will cause the NPC to stop, look around, and occasionally change direction for a little bit. So they might go halfway along their path, back a little bit, forward again, back a bit, and it might take them 3 times as long to get along their set path. Whereas if you have this guy set to false, and then pause while following path set to true, this will just mean he stops for a break, or she stops for a break. So it's up to you. NPC returning to its spawn location. So if you set return to start to true, if an NPC wanders too far, if it follows a player too far, or if it dies, each one of those events will trigger a teleportation event back to where it spawns. This is designed to protect people protect the NPC from people using a golden lasso, or it also allows the aggro to reset if the NPC does drift too far away. We've got a nocturnal setting, so avoid sun will basically mean this NPC prefers to be underground, in caves, under trees. They won't necessarily die if they come out into the sun, they just don't like it. Suffers fall damage, that's pretty straightforward. Suffers fall damage means if you throw it off a cliff, it will get hurt. Shelter from. Now, shelter from is very similar to avoid sun, but it allows you to select darkness and sun. So if you're in a room, it's well lit everywhere but one corner, and you've got avoid darkness set, the NPC will never go in that dark section. Same thing for sun. That doesn't necessarily mean sun, it just means a lit up area. Alright, so every NPC has an option to have a nameplate. Generic NPCs like the SGC soldier don't have a nameplate because they're all called the same thing and it would crowd the player's screen a little bit. But for points of interest, traders, trainers, bosses, that kind of stuff, we generally set the name to true or when attacking, always or when attacking. Just allows the player to say, hey, this guy's more important than the rest. Animation. Pretty straightforward. There are quite a few set options here. I'll go through them now. Normal is walking, straightforward, standing effectively. Dancing is a bit funny. If you wanted to set up maybe a few NPCs in an inn or a bar, you could do so. Have them dancing around the floor. Sitting functions correctly when you put an NPC on top of a chair, so if you set a spawn location to a chair in game, the NPC will correctly sit on it. If your rotation's wrong though, you'll need to tweak that a little bit. Crawling is the NPC down on all fours. Typically this would be used for a kid or a baby maybe. Crying, again, is the NPC upset for whatever reason. Hugging, if you don't have two NPCs hugging each other, it looks really crazy. Sitting, that's a duplicated comment, so we'll just ignore that. Waving, straightforward, if you wanted to set someone on the side of an ocean waving out to sea. Don't know why maybe they're a bit sick. Sneaking is the last option. This simulates someone a little bit hunched over, walking around like a rogue maybe, about to stab somebody. Yeah, so that's our animations. Hope this is quite helpful for you guys. If not, good. Never mind. Alright, so next section, combat. Basically this is just a heap of does the NPC take damage, how much, does their health regenerate, all that kind of stuff. So we'll get started. Line 97, health regen. How many hearts should the NPC gain when out of combat until they're at full health? By default it's set to 5, that's pretty high, but when NPCs aren't in combat they should regenerate to avoid death. Also it means that if a player runs away and comes back, they're going to regenerate pretty quickly and make it an ineffective way to kill them. Combat regen should be generally 20% of your health regen, so one tick per second, or sorry, 1 heart per tick will happen. Can attack invisible, affects admins, it affects people with cloaks, pretty straightforward. Does this NPC want to kill you if you're hidden? Defend faction members is a really great option to set to true for guards. It means that anyone who is friendly that isn't a player, so NPCs only, any NPC that is friendly will get defended by this NPC. Attacked response for guards, you probably want retaliate set as that option, but there is retreat and ignore and panic. Ignore is generally something you'd want to set for maybe an ascended being that can't be killed. Panic for a civilian. Retreat would probably be for someone who's injured maybe, up to you. Alright, next step, must see target. Does the NPC require line of sight to kill their enemy? Now, if there is a block in the way that is semi-solid, like leaves, etc., this will still block it, so you may want to consider turning it off. It's entirely up to you. For realism though, must-see target should generally be turned on. Attack hostile factions is basically, will this NPC initiate combat? So if a Goa'uld comes through the gate on Earth, will this guard turn around and shoot him? You probably want this turned on. If it's someone trying to sneak around or a civilian trying to hide, probably not. Next step is immune to fire. If you've got an ascended Ori being that can be killed, you probably want to turn this guy on, just so you can have some cool fire effects around him. A lot of these are pretty straightforward, guys. I'm just going through them for the sake of it. You can listen in. Saves reading. Alright, so the next one is immune to potions. So if a player throws a poison potion or any kind of potion on the NPC, will it be affected by it? The next one is this NPC invulnerable? The only accepted submissions for an invulnerable NPC will either be an NPC that is in an arena that does not perform any combat, or an ascended being. The other option is a hologram, of course. Alright, so the next option is tactical distance. Tactical distance is actually different depending on the tactical type setting below. I'm going to go through the tactical type to start with, and then we'll come back to that. So the tactical type of surround will have the NPC follow a circular pattern around their target, and tactical distance will be the distance away from that target that they try to keep. Hit and run will result in the NPC running in and doing a melee attack, and then running back to the distance of tactical distance. For ambush, the NPC will hover around the tactical distance away from the player or the NPC, and then it'll dart in and attack and then go back to where it was. It's similar to hit and run, but not quite. Dodge. Dodge is pretty straightforward. The NPC is going to make sure that it stays at 12 blocks away for this example, or whatever tactical distance is set. Stalk is, it's going to follow the player but not necessarily engage very often, and again, tactical distance is how far away from the player it's going to be. Now, if you don't want any AI behavior on your NPC, then just set it to none, and it'll be a basic run at them and hurt them. Aggro range, the next option, basically covers how far away from the NPC do they keep track of whether or not there's hostile mobs or NPCs there, as well as players. Don't set this to more than 64 blocks because it can lag the server if there is a lot of NPCs doing this scan. 64, we can have 10,000 NPCs. If you set that to 128, that number of NPCs that we can have active on the server drops by about 100-fold, so we're looking at maybe 100 instead of 10,000. Next step, the melee section. Pretty straightforward. Melee range, that's the number of blocks that the NPC can be from the player and still strike in melee. Damage is the number of hearts that the melee strike does, and knockback is a value that basically it's how far they're going to knock the player back when they hit them. If you set this to 3, it's probably what a Wraith did to Shepard on that desert planet. 1 is what you'd probably want a Staff Blast to do, for example. But this is melee, so up to you. Ranged. So the ranged options for the player, for the NPC. We've got a few settings. Accuracy, 75% is actually a miss rate that is pretty high, so players can dodge it. If you start getting up above 80 to 90%, that's when players will have trouble avoiding the NPC. Range, how many blocks away can this NPC shoot from? 32 is a decent size. Have it as 64 if you like, I don't mind, but try to keep that for the snipers. Burst count. So burst count is how many projectiles are fired per shot. So if it's a machine gun, you probably want this at 5 to 10. For a staff, you probably want to leave that as 1 or 2. Yeah. Alright, so the delay settings here, this operates similar to our market. You've got a min and a max delay. This is in ticks, so 20 ticks is 1 second. This is basically saying 0.25 seconds to 0.75 seconds between shots. So this NPC will fire 5 bullets every 0.25 to 0.75 seconds. The fire rate is how often, it's similar to delay, but the fire rate is a constant value that the max delay and min delay are worked against. So if you set this to 5, it's similar to a machine gun or a pistol, whereas you probably want to set this to something like 20 or 30 for a staff weapon, something that has a slow reload time, for example. How many shots are in a standard volley? The shot count is... how do I explain this one? Shot count is how many projectiles are displayed in the air, and the effective splash damage of said projectile. So for a shotgun style weapon, you probably want to set this to 3 or 4, maybe 5, and it'll effectively have everything arc out into a wide wall of, yeah, you'll get hurt. If you leave that as 1 though, you'll have a standard projectile going in one direction, and for a machine gun you'll have a heap, but they'll all be following each other directly. There won't be any arcing out or duplication of the projectile. Finally, we've got aimed while shooting. Does this NPC lift its arms up as if to shoot a gun? Yes or no? Simple as that. Next bit is, when should the NPC use their ranged weapon? Now, they will always use it when they're far away, so if you want to set it to until close, that'll allow the NPC to do melee combat when they're attacked. Always will mean that the NPC will either retreat to or begin firing from like a meter away kind of thing. When moving is when this NPC is knocked on its ass, pardon the French, and is moving toward the player or away from them, it will return fire. Alright, so next step, the sound. So the sound is probably the most important thing for the NPC's ranged weapon. This is a text string that is derived from the NPC wand in single player. If you grab up Minecraft and go grab the NPC wand, right click on the ground, that'll bring up the NPC window. It'll allow you to edit the NPC you've just spawned. If you go to the AI tab and then go down to ranged options, it'll allow you to select the sound effect. Browse through that list, it'll allow you to hear them, and once you're happy with the one you want, just grab that string, paste it in. Alright. So next step, resistances. Resistances are how much this NPC will take from a projectile weapon or a melee hit, or how much they'll be knocked back from it. The acceptable values for this are not 0 to 100, they are -1, 0 through to 2, and it's a double value, so you've got a decimal there. 0.0 is -100% resistance, which is effectively meaning this NPC will take double damage or double knockback. 2.0 is this NPC has 100% resistance and is effectively invulnerable to said attack. And 1.0 is this NPC is indifferent, it doesn't have anything applied to it, and it'll just take the raw damage. Arrow affects all projectile weapons, so this NPC specifically has a 25% bonus to resistance. Melee is any melee hit. Again, this NPC has a 25% bonus. Explosion, that's pretty straightforward. Anything that explodes in front of the NPC, it's going to take 25% less damage. And knockback. If the NPC was going to get knocked back 10 blocks, this will drop it back down to 7.5, so it'll only be knocked back nearly 8 blocks total. I hope that made sense, guys. Long story short, if the resistances are set and you set it so the NPC is invulnerable, these settings are actually ignored and all set to 2.0, so you can leave them as is if you've got invulnerable set above. Alright, next step is death handling, so the death section. You can set whether or not this NPC spawns at all. So if you set it to no, the NPC will despawn on death. It will always spawn on server start though, so you can consider that as an option. Always is this NPC will always respawn time seconds from its death. Then you've got a day and a night option. The day and the night option is world specific, so yeah, I'll leave that up to you guys. Respawns at spawn. Will the NPC spawn at its original spawn point or where it died? That's what that means. If you set this to true, it'll spawn back where it was when the server started. Otherwise, it will spawn where it died. Hide dead body. Do you want to see the corpse or not? Set that to true or false, doesn't really matter. Naturally despawns will mean that if there is no player around the NPC for a period of time, it will eventually despawn. Generally this is around 10 minutes, so yeah. Alright, next section is factions. The faction section is how many faction points the player will lose or gain if they kill the NPC. Again, this needs to be a valid faction. You've got two options here. By default, you'll need to select one faction which the NPC belongs to. So if it's a Stargate Command NPC, if you kill it, obviously you should lose reputation with the Stargate Command faction. For the second faction on death, it's best to set the primary enemy for the Stargate Command faction as the second faction. Let me start again for that section, sorry. Alright, so for factions, set the primary faction on death to the same faction as the NPC, and obviously you're going to subtract some reputation from that faction. For the secondary faction on death, set that to the primary enemy of the NPC's faction. So that's, in this case, the Goa'uld, and you obviously want to gain some reputation if you kill that NPC. Now, I know there's only two options here, but there is a little event that occurs in the background every time an NPC dies, and if a player is granted reputation with a faction, they lose it with every ally of the enemy factions. So, because the Goa'uld are enemies with Stargate Command, they're also enemies with the Tolan and a few others. If you gain reputation with the Goa'uld, it will make you lose a little bit with all these as well. Likewise, for losing reputation, if you lose reputation with a faction, you will gain it with that faction's enemies. Alright, next step. Minimum and maximum experience dropped on kill. Set this to whatever you like, guys. Minimum and maximum, a random number will be selected between those two that allows a player to pick up some XP. Next step, movement. So movement speed of 5 is the standard. If you want to set this to 10, it's ridiculously fast. 1 is the NPC barely moves. You better have a good reason to set it to 1 or 10. Trust me, I'm not going to accept it otherwise. Alright, so you got two options for movement, follow path or wandering. Now, turning on enabled for either of these sections will effectively knock out the other one, so make sure you only turn one on. If you want a follow path NPC, then just list under the steps a series of coordinates. If you want more than 2 steps, copy and paste this section here below and rename that 2 to a 3, and then do the same again but rename the 3 to a 4, etc, etc. Some of the NPC paths we have actually have 40 or 50 steps, so the more complex it is, the cooler it looks in game. If you don't want a path and you just want the NPC to wander around a little bit, it's good for maybe an innkeeper or something, then turn wandering on and set the distance to something reasonable. Yeah, it's pretty easy. Alright, next bit, interactions. Now this is fun. First config option for the interaction section is say random lines. Now every NPC has a series of different line types. If you want, you can turn random lines off and they will go through the same order every time. There are some situations where you want maybe all the world lines to happen in the same order so that you've got 2 NPCs having a conversation the player can listen into. But 9 times out of 10 you just want to leave random lines turned on. Now the line types, pretty straightforward. World lines, that's a list of up to 8 strings of text that the NPC will randomly say whenever a player is nearby. If you want to include a player name, you can substitute squiggly bracket player close squiggly bracket where the player's name should be, and on the player's screen it'll actually show as "Hey Bysokar," for example. Would you like me to do anything for you? The next section. So world lines is random stuff that gets said when the player doesn't necessarily do anything to the NPC but they're nearby. Attack lines, they're straightforward. If the NPC is going to attack you, he's going to say this, so it's going to be something along the lines of "we will defend ourselves" or whatever. Interact lines, this is what happens when you right click on the NPC. Now this should be empty if there is a dialogue set. I'll get into dialogues later. If the dialogue isn't set, then just set this to a few different things that the NPC says, like I can't help you, or move along, get lost, whatever you like. Kill lines, this is what the NPC will say to a player as they kill them. Killed lines are what happens to the NPC, what the NPC says when they actually die. So, should be something along the lines of them gurgling for breath. Yeah. Alright, so quick recap. Up to 8 lines per section. The more the better. If you wish to have a player name substituted into the line that gets said, just pop in squiggly bracket player, close squiggly bracket. Now, if the NPC says it once, and there are 2 players nearby, it will actually appear different for both players, so it'll always have their player name. Alright, so that's that section. Dialogues, I'm not going to get into in this guide, but that'll be the complex dialogues where players actually have a few options. It can trigger off quests, and yeah, it's quite in-depth, so we'll get into that later. Just leave that as none for now. Alright, loadout. Now this is fun. This is what your NPC is wearing. Now typically they don't need to wear any armor because you can set resistance values and that kind of stuff, and their skin should show the armor. This is true for the Serpent Guard and the SGC Soldier, but you will need to set them with a main hand and an optional offhand weapon, and I'll go through that now. So the main hand, all of the loadout options, we'll go with that first, have 3 options: mod, item, and damage value. The mod is an NEI dump format mod name. It's typically the name of a mod with no spaces and all lowercase. And then item is the name of the item. In the case of a P90, it's P90, but it can be Matok_staff and a few other examples. Grab them all from the items.csv file when you do an NEI items dump. Every line of the dump file consists of mod, item name, comma, item number, and then a whole heap of stuff we don't care about. The only 2 things you care about are mod and item name in this section here. Now, if the item you want them to hold has a damage value on the item ID, you need to check that on the official server, not in single player. Just pop the damage value there. The same goes for the head, chest, leg, and boot pieces, as well as the offhand, so I won't go into that. Alright, so for projectile, that's the next section. We have several projectile types available. We've got arrow, bullet, none, gold plasma, blue plasma, red plasma, and white plasma. Now, all of those plasma values are color plasma, no spaces, and they are the only options. You can't just put in pink, purple, whatever you like. If you're unsure of them, just let one of the staff members know, and you can probably take a look at the wiki guide when that's available. So yeah, set a projectile type. The projectile 3D options are rarely helpful. You can turn them on if you like. If the projectile is large enough, the player will actually see it spinning or sticking on the wall briefly for a while. Size is what size the projectile should be. A bullet is 1, maybe 2, but probably 1. An arrow would be 3 or 4. Plasma blast would probably be 4. Speed. Speed is the number of blocks per tick that a projectile will cover. So an arrow is generally maybe 15 to 25. A staff weapon maybe 30. A bullet should be 40, 50, or even 60. Next step. Knockback. Now this is separate to the knockback value above. This is for the projectile weapon only. Again, set this if you like. 0 is no knockback, 1 is a little bit, like maybe you just got hit by a staff blast. 2 and 3 starts getting ridiculous, so you'd want that for maybe an RPG or something. Gravity. Gravity is the next option. That guy there means that the projectile will eventually fall to the ground if it's shot on a level surface. For a plasma weapon, they don't get affected by gravity, but for a bullet or an arrow, you need to set that as on, otherwise things get a bit unrealistic. Damage, that's the number of hearts that each projectile hit will do. It doesn't include crit damage, so again, that's up to you what you want to do. True or false, is this NPC projectile explosive? Alright, so explosive is a really dangerous setting because it currently bypasses grief prevention. I'm working on a way to fix that. If the NPC doesn't have any chance of going to a claimed area, then I don't mind if people turn it on, but for now just leave it off. We've got options here. 1 would be a staff blast, 2 is a grenade, 3 is the equivalent of TNT. There is no 0 value, so just leave that as whatever and then set it to false if you want to turn it off. What projectile trail should the projectile have when it's in the air? Bullets, arrows, even plasma blasts typically don't have a trail, but if you want to give it one, there are several options here. Maybe for a grenade launcher, a bit of smoke coming out behind it would be pretty cool. If the projectile is coming from a ancient ascended person, you might want to give it a lightning or a magic trail. Entirely up to you. Next section is loot dropped. So loot dropped is what the NPC will drop when it dies. It's pretty straightforward. The first section we've got here has mode. Now, if you set this to default, the NPC will drop the items on the ground where they die, and that's that. Players can pick them up. Some guy can run through just as at the moment you kill the NPC, and then the items are gone. You'll have to kill the player for them. And then we've got auto pickup. So auto pickup will automatically transfer the items to the person who killed the NPC. Helpful, sort of. For realism, I'd probably turn it off, but entirely up to you guys. Next up, enabled. If you turn this to false, the loot table is ignored. So only do this if you don't want the NPC to drop anything. Generally everything should, just an opinion of mine, but up to you. The table below can list up to 9 items. If you have more than 9 items, weird stuff can happen, including them not getting added or the NPC not loading. So just try to set this to 9 items or less. This setting here operates similar to loadout with the addition of chance. This is a number between 1 and 100, or sorry, 0 and 100, and it's the percent chance that the item will drop if the player kills the NPC. Item follows the same format as the NEI dump stuff for loadout. It's mod name, NEI dump format, item name, the number of them, and then the damage value. So if you set number of to more than the maximum stack size for the item, it won't give them 2 stacks, it'll just not load the item. So make sure you put that to less than 64, or in the case of an item that doesn't stack to 64, set it to the maximum stack size at the most. Alright, so go through to all of these guys, make sure you set every single one if you can. If you don't want every item slot to be a possible drop, just set the mod and item to none. Alright, so next step, spawning. Item config line 355. Quite a few. The spawning section covers whether or not you want this NPC to spawn as a single entity, like maybe John Shepard on Atlantis for example, whether you want them to randomly spawn somewhere, whether or not they're going to spawn as part of an event will come later, but I've left that in there as well. And then finally we've got something called cloned list. Now cloned list is really, really helpful for traders, for trainers and soldiers. It allows you to have one config file for an NPC that has the same behavior that can exist across multiple worlds, multiple factions, and they can all look different, they can all have different names, titles, all that kind of stuff. Alright, so I'm just going to go through the options for the default spawn type, which is one NPC somewhere wandering around, or standing still. The default spawn type has one option, which is spawn location. It's an XYZ coordinate set, as well as the world name. If you have a hyphen in the world name, be sure to put a set of quotes around the name of the world, otherwise it's going to break the config file. And please make sure the spawn coordinates are dead on the dot. So what you need to do is physically go to that location, look straight down, and check your mini-map. If you put in anything else, it might be off by a couple of blocks and you might find the NPC spawning in the wall. For the random spawn type, this is a bit of a cool thing. Every 15 seconds, NPCs have a chance to spawn, very similar to how the market works. This allows you to set the criteria for the NPC spawning. First option we've got is faction territory. Now, faction territory is basically a list of massive craft factions that this NPC can spawn in the territory of. I highly recommend leaving unclaimed territory there, because if you don't, the NPC will only spawn in claimed land, and that's never good. But again, you might want the random spawning NPC to spawn in claimed land only. For example, if it's a Toland citizen, you might want it to wander around inside Toland territory only. The next step is worlds. Now, you need to list every world that you want the NPC to spawn on. If you set that to nothing, then it'll spawn on any world. Galaxies is the same thing again, but these two settings are not related. So if you set Milky Way, and then you set a Pegasus world, every world in the Milky Way will be whitelisted, as well as that Pegasus world. Likewise, if you set that to Pegasus and you add a Pegasus world, that's just doubling up and saying it's allowed twice. The can spawn not on majority world option is a true or false value that basically, if the NPC faction owns the world, it will always spawn there. If you set this to true, it will prevent it spawning on worlds owned by another faction. So, for example, a Tauri SGC soldier that is wandering around the SGC probably shouldn't spawn in Toland territory or Guaul territory, but you might want a SG team to spawn there, so you will turn that to true. Chance is the chance per minute that the NPC will spawn in. Only one NPC will spawn, so you need to make sure the chance is high enough that it will happen. So if you've got an NPC that has an 80% chance to spawn, an NPC with 20% will have a far less chance of it happening. I don't really know how to explain that any better. Group spawns. Now, if you set a group name for an NPC and that NPC spawns, every other random spawning NPC is checked, and if they have the same group, they will also go through a chance process of having another one of them spawn. So if you've got, say, a Jafar patrol, for example, you've got 4 of them spawning in, you might set them all part of a group called Jafar Patrol, and then have a chance of 25% to spawn in, meaning you may get up to 4 guys, you might have 3 in some patrols, you may have 2, whatever. If you set always in group true, that will mean that those 4 guys will always spawn together, if that makes sense. A great example of how I've set this up is I've got a Jafar patrol running around a few worlds. 4 of those guys will always spawn because they've got always in group set to true. One of them is a boss. He will not spawn all the time, so he's got always in group false, but he's part of the same group, and he has a 10% chance to spawn. So you've got 4 Jafar running around all the time, and every now and then a first prime Jafar will join them. Group area 10. That's a size. It's basically a square area of 10 by 10 blocks around the first NPC, where the extra ones in the group will be placed. I hope that makes sense, guys. It's just to prevent them spawning on the same location, because it literally dumps them on top of each other and it doesn't look too good. Alright, so the event config option for spawning doesn't have any values, so don't use it, guys. Straightforward. Clone list. Now, clone list is one of the most helpful things that's been created for the NPCs. It allows you to set custom spawn locations for each clone, as well as different worlds, different rotation settings, different textures, different sizes, different factions, different model types if you want. So that stuff I mentioned before about dragons and zombies and fish and all kinds of stuff, you can have each one a different type of model. You can set some to be male, some to be female. The is female setting is very similar to has breasts up the top there. Name and title, again, pretty straightforward. Generally, NPCs that are part of the same clone list should have the same title. Say if it's a mining trainer, you should know that that is a mining trainer. And then again, primary faction on death, that stuff should change depending on what you set the clone's faction to. So for an SGC soldier, if faction is set to Stargate Command, you should probably have primary faction on death set to Stargate Command, secondary for Goa'uld. If the NPC's faction was Atlantis Expedition, you should probably set primary to Atlantis Expedition and secondary to Wraith. I hope that makes sense, guys. So we've got X, Y, Z, world name, rotation settings, texture type. All of this is identical to the settings above, only it will apply to this specific clone here. Yeah, and you can list as many as you want. I don't care if there's 200 of these bad boys. As long as you do it right, 200 identical functionality NPCs will spawn, all with different factions and display values, basically. Guys, that's the end of this guide. I'm just going to quickly go back to the trader example and do that as a bonus. Anyone who's not interested in creating a trader, this is not relevant to you whatsoever, so have fun creating NPCs. Alright, so this is our food trader example. There's a config file for Cora on Sanctuary, as well as several others. They're all chefs in Stargate Command, Destiny, etc. You'll notice that underneath the display section and before the behavior section, there is actually a jobs and a roles section. If you wish to set trader or job to anything other than none, you will need to set these options. Alright, so for healers, just quickly, I know I said traders before, but we'll go through this. Range is how far away a player can be before the healer stops healing them. Maximum is 16 blocks. Speed, the lower the value, the faster the NPC will heal. 5's generally pretty good, it's about a heart every 2 seconds. If you wish to override the main hand item of a healer, you can set the item name, mod and damage value similar to the loadout stuff before. This is good if you want them to be holding a bandage or something if they're a healer, otherwise not. This functionality, however, is pretty broken, so if you don't get it perfect, it will break the entire NPC. I recommend turning it off for now. Alright, so trader. This is fun. Traders have two options. Do they ignore damage values for items being traded with them? So if you've got maybe, how do I put this? If you've got a series of crystals, each have the same item ID and different damage values, and you're asking for a specific one of those crystals, you probably want to say false to ignore damage, because you want to get that specific damage value. For MBT data, ignore MBT basically means if the item is unique in any way, for example a P90 with a scope on it, that doesn't have a damage value for that setting, or any obvious way to tell that it's unique, you need to set ignore MBT data to false. So every P90 with a scope has the same MBT data, meaning you don't want to ignore it. If you don't care if the P90 that the player is trading in has a scope or not, then you can turn that to true and it'll just hand it in. Hope that makes sense, guys. If it doesn't, I will clarify and redo this section of the guide. Now, for items, there are up to 18 items listed, and the way the traders work is they will have a result item stack, which can be a single item up to 64 of them, and this will follow the same section, same way as the loadout before. You'll need to grab the mod, the item name, both in NEI dump format, as well as the number of them, and the damage value for that item, and you set that to the result. So this is what the player wants, and they can trade up to 2 different item stacks to fill these out, similar to the result stuff. Mod, item, number of damage. And basically the idea of this is the player will trade these 2 item stacks, or one of them if you don't set the second one, for the result. You can see the examples in game if you like. Yeah. Alright guys, that's this guide done. Nearly an hour. Please let me know if I need to clarify anything. Otherwise, grab a template config file, copy it into Notepad, edit it, customize it, make it yours, and then submit it back to us. Thanks for listening.